Hello, Valley Presbyterian Church. We're continuing with the theme of trials in James chapter 1 as we pick up here in verse 12 and following. James says, "Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures." And one of the most severe trials we can endure is temptation. And James mentions here that he doesn't want us to be deceived. The way that we can be deceived under temptation is to say that we're being tempted by God. James cuts that off at the head by saying that God doesn't tempt anyone, that he's a giver of good and perfect gifts. And what James is driving at is something within us called desires. And desires are merely one aspect of who we are. We are also thinking beings and willing beings. We are feeling beings. And it's the desires that James says that give birth to sin, which brings forth death. And the temptations are great opportunities. See your temptations as opportunities, I would say. One is not to accuse God. We know that he's sovereign over all things, and yet it's challenging when temptations come our way. James says that they well up often from within. Now, certain circumstances can bring out different temptations within us, but the main thing to do is not to accuse God, but to consider God and to consider how he's the giver of every good and perfect gift. And James' point here is we can think, as it relates to our temptations, that we have no way out. Corinthians promises that God provides a way out, but James here reminds us that we are a kind of a first fruits, that we are new creatures, that we aren't bound or enslaved to our temptations or our desires, that God has brought us forth by his word of truth through the gospel and made us new creations so that we truly can obey. And obeying, in a sense, is fleeing from temptation and clinging to God, crying out to God for wisdom. James says that we should seek God and seek his wisdom for ways that we can stand up and endure under trials. He says that earlier in chapter 1. So my counsel to you would be, one, in times of temptation, try not to accuse God. Try to flee to God. He is a giver of good gifts. He gives wisdom. He gives grace. And he's made you a new creature that you might remain steadfast and endure and have your faith shaped and grown and become ever grittier as you trust God rather than your own desires or your feelings, but trust God and obey his word. Be blessed.